Here's a look at building bridges with WTPN.
Well, I tell you that the greatest tragedy of all is how urgently the Iraqi government wanted peace. And I want to communicate, this was not a last-minute peace negotiations. Talks with Iraq's ambassador and senior diplomats at the United Nations began in November of 2000. Okay, in the last days of the Clinton administration. This was done with the full knowledge of the CIA and the Defense Intelligence Agency and with Saddam Hussein himself and Tariq Aziz. They wanted dialogue and peace. And the CIA, before the talks ever began, the CIA put out feelers and said, if we're going to have talks, you have to promise us, we have to be able to cover certain things, certain areas. And Iraq's immediate response was yes. Ambassador Dr. Saeed Hassan, who later became Deputy Foreign Minister of Iraq, said that the conversation would be short because he could agree to he had permission from Baghdad to agree with all known U.S. concerns. And this message was communicated to Vice President-elect Dick Cheney on December 20th, year 2000, before George Bush was ever sworn into office. The conversation and dialogue continued through the next 18 months. Every single thing that the United States demanded, the United States got. So this was not a last-minute thing. Very important to understand. This was a long-term discussion. It started before war was ever on the horizon. The CIA was determined to drive a hard bargain. It kept making all sorts of demands that frankly exceeded the sanctions. Iraq was willing to give the United States much more than the sanctions required to get this off. And everything we demanded, we got.
Everything. So there was no problem.
There was no problem. And let me just tell you what that means. For example, weapons inspections. The world was told that Saddam Hussein's government was resisting the weapons inspections.
Yes.
In fact, it was you were told that. You were told that Saddam would not let the weapons inspectors back in. But that was a lie. In fact, Saddam Hussein's government agreed in November of 2000, while Bill Clinton was still in office, that the weapons inspectors could begin immediately at the start of in the first weeks or a couple of months of the Bush administration. And the behavior, the Iraqi diplomats were the only thing they were worried about is what would happen once the United States realized that there were no weapons of mass destruction inside Iraq. What would be the mechanism that would compel the United Nations to accept the inevitable, that there were no illegal weapons, and how could it? And no excuses. How could the United States? How could Iraq protect itself? And so when it talked like this in these conversations, I knew that Iraq would have no weapons of mass destruction. I was convinced of it, and I repeatedly told the CIA and my cousin. And you will be shocked to hear this. My cousin was the chief of staff to President Bush. So every single letter that I gave to the CIA was in fact addressed to Andrew Card, who was my cousin at the White House, and every single letter, without exception, was delivered to his house in Virginia.
They were in the loop 100%.
They were in the loop at the highest levels. There's no way they could pretend they didn't know.
But my question is, and not really a question but a statement, didn't we have the team leader for the inspection team that was going in to look for weapons of mass destruction, didn't we have him quit because he was not agreeing with the way the inspections were being run, or was the real reason he quit because he realized that it was a sham?
Well, I seem to recall that the International Atomic Energy Commission got a Nobel Peace Prize for conducting the weapons inspections in Iraq. I think the whole thing has been a scam.
Yeah.
The greatest weapon of mass destruction against Iraq was, the greatest weapon of mass destruction in Iraq was the United Nations sanctions, which killed 2 million human beings, including 1 million children under the age of 5. There's a lot of propaganda that tries to downplay that figure and tries to undercount. And they try to say that only 500,000 children died. Only. But that is only counting the dead children, dead babies, up to 1996. And the United Nations has a funny way, of not counting the dead children from 96 until 2003. And in fact, 2 million human beings died. That's genocide. Now, if these people were Jewish or Israeli, we'd be hearing about this forever. But you don't hear any of the corporate media talking about it. In fact, the United Nations, it is the Foreign Affairs Journal, very prestigious in Washington, had an outstanding article that the United Nations sanctions against Iraq killed more human beings than all the weapons of mass destruction ever used in history combined. The sanctions killed more than all weapons of mass destruction ever.
Yes. Actually, there are, of course, big problems in Iraq. The numbers are very big numbers, enormous numbers, and of course everybody is sorry for that. But there are problems in Iraq. If we solve them, I mean,
almost nothing happens.
Yeah, almost nothing happens, because there are also problems in Syria, in Afghanistan, in East Turkestan, Xinjiang, and in all over the world. So it's not enough to solve a problem in a country, in a specific country. So we have to think deeply and find a general solution to violence and terrorism, I think.
Well, but the thing is that Iraq was a situation where it was man-made. The United Nations wiped out literacy in a single generation. Iraq went from having the best hospitals in the Middle East that rivaled London and New York and Los Angeles to having an obliterated medical system. When I visited Baghdad, I visited hospitals. They threw open their doors, their medicine cabinets, and there was no aspirin. There was no chemotherapy. There was no insulin. There was no heart medication. If someone was in pain and suffering, they had no anesthesia. It was very difficult to do these things. You had to be very wealthy to buy medicine, and this was created by the United Nations. And for the United Nations to act in judgment of any country after the crimes that it has committed, I find very difficult.